Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another MBA webinar on elder financial abuse. I'm Tess Race. I'm MBA's general counsel. I'm joined by Corey Lynch. He's product evangelist for Verafin. Verafin is the industry's leading financial crime management platform. And Marty Fleischecker, senior financial fraud ombudsperson for the Minnesota Department of Commerce. If you have questions for our speakers, just put them in the chat and I will pose them to the speakers. We're going to kick it off today with Corey. You all set, Corey?
I'm all set, Tess. Thanks for the wonderful intro. Let me call up my presentation. Hopefully everyone out there can see my screen for this educational webinar on elder financial abuse. So I want to welcome everybody today. This webinar is brought to you by Verafin and the Minnesota Bankers Association, the champion for Minnesota bankers. And today's topic is an important one that holds a very personal connection for almost everybody, and that's elder financial abuse. And we're going to be talking about best practices for financial institutions and using early detection and timely reporting. And as Tess said, my name is Corey Lynch, Verafin's product evangelist. And this is a topic that we're certainly passionate about here at Verafin. It's all about keeping the financial ecosystem safe and secure. It's important that we have adequate protections for some of the most at-risk groups. That's something we can all get behind. Now, there's a lot that I want to say today. You can probably already tell I'm a talker, so let's dive right in. Some of the things we'll be discussing today include an overview of elder financial abuse, with a look at the increasing prevalence of the crime, the perpetrators, and the devastating economic and social impacts. We're going to talk about best practices, including customer education, internal training, monitoring, and then we'll pass it over and we'll have a chat about reporting. I'm also happy that we're going to be able to share some resources with you folks at the end of the session here today. So first, a little bit about Verafin. From human trafficking to terrorism, elder abuse, fraud rings, and scams, Verafin's core purpose is always to fight crime. That is our sole focus as a company. And we have hundreds of professionals dedicated to this singular purpose. And our mission is supported by our financial crime management platform pictured here. Gaze upon it. We've got solutions for fraud detection and management, BSA AML compliance and management, high-risk customer management, sanction screening and management. I just said management 5 times in a row. Record, I think, for the number of managements in 1 minute. All surrounded in our platform by a hard candy shell we call information sharing. Now, underpinning all of this is enterprise case management and enterprise reporting and dashboards. And this comprehensive cloud-based offering provides investigators with access to a holistic view of a customer's activity whenever you're investigating something, including elder financial abuse. Now, additionally, updates are released and managed by Verafin on a weekly cadence. This always ensures our customers have the tools to keep pace with both the evolving financial crime landscape and the constantly shifting regulatory guidance and expectations. Now, on to the meat and potatoes of today. Elder financial abuse is something that is a significant and growing problem and impacts so many people. And it's something you probably have a personal connection to, either knowing someone directly or hearing stories about someone close to you that has suffered from this ever-growing problem. It really is an evergreen issue. And that's for a good reason. By 2035, the number of Americans over the age of 65 is estimated to be over 90 million people. And whenever you have a population like that, there are fraudsters always willing to exploit with their nefarious schemes. Now, there are a variety of reasons that your elderly customers may be more at risk. There could always be issues around physical disabilities or cognitive decline. There are issues sometimes around isolation or loneliness. A lack of technological awareness can also play a part. Now, one of these factors, or often a combination of factors, paints the picture of an attractive target for financial criminals. And unfortunately, the exploitation of seniors, it's all too common. And it's often traced directly back to trusted persons like family members, caregivers, and close friends. In 2021, DOJ Associate Attorney General Vanita Gupta said this: every year, millions of older Americans are abused, neglected, and financially exploited, often by those who are entrusted to care for them. So while financial abuse is sometimes perpetrated by anonymous criminals, and that is certainly an issue. It is often those in a position of trust committing the crime. And actually, having someone in a position of trust further compounds the tragedy, and it also makes a complicated situation even more complex when we talk about reporting and investigation. Because the perpetrator is often known to the victims may be embarrassed, and they'll still sometimes feel the need to protect those closest to them, even in the face of financial abuse. If a close family member is committing the crime, you're often going to see that reticence to come forward. That's why it's actually thought that only a small fraction of these incidents are ever reported. The victims, as I've said, they're reticent to do any type of reporting, and they may actually even lie to cover for someone close to them. And of course, when the victim is willing to lie to protect the perpetrator, that's going to complicate what investigators can do to actually stop the crime from occurring. According to a White House statement, elder abuse incidents are so seldom reported that for every one that is reported, 23 cases may never be brought to light. The financial and emotional ramifications of this are huge. Certainly, there's feelings of loneliness and isolation that can increase. This also takes an emotional toll. But then, of course, beyond the emotional toll, there's also the financial fallout that we need to consider. And make no mistake, the financial losses are very significant, reaching $2.94 billion in 2021 for internet-based scams alone, according to the IC3. And with possible cognitive decline, or sometimes just due to a lack of familiarity with technology, elder customers can certainly be at a greater risk of victimization and fraud scams. And the list is exhaustive. And I'm sure you've seen so many of this in your institution or seen it in the news. But some of the things that we see, and it's certainly not limited to these things: romance scams, lottery scams, grandparent scams, and IRS imposter scams. And while we know people of all ages and walks of life fall prey to scams, that is a truism, at-risk groups such as your elderly population may provide an attractive target for fraudsters specifically. The victim themselves may be used more broadly in criminal enterprises. Sometimes they're used as unwitting money mules, used to receive or move illicit funds from illicit activities. And the number of channels available to fraudsters grows. Every year, we see new ways to move money and new ways to steal money. Scams are now coming at you by mail, over the telephone, by email, social media, text messages. If there is a way to communicate, it is being used and exploited by criminals as we speak. And senior customers may provide online banking credentials to the fraudster as part of a scam. This is one thing we know occurs. But with the right information, fraudsters can do so much damage. They can open accounts, they can access online banking in the victims' names, and drain vast swaths of income. And sometimes this is very hard to spot, or as we said, if it's someone close to you, you may never even be aware. So whether it's a perpetrator known or unknown, this is a significant problem. Now, here you see a recent real-world example of elder financial abuse, and it was unsealed by the U.S. Department of Justice. In August 2021, the department indicted 6 individuals for coordinating a massive grandparent scam network. The defendants themselves allegedly stole more than $2 million from over 70 elderly victims all across the United States by impersonating grandchildren, family or friends in need, and leveraging fraud and extortion tactics. You know the one we're talking about, the one where your grandchild or someone close to you is in a foreign country and they need money. They're in trouble. Now, wire transfers were one channel through which the funds were obtained. Now, listed here are some of the most common scams that the FBI encounters, as well as tips to help you prevent from being victimized. This is actually a great resource to also share with your customers. And we're going to talk about customer education today, But the first line of defense in this type of crime is always going to be customer education. Forewarned is forearmed. I almost fooled that saying up, and that's such an old one. In fact, my grandmother taught me that saying. At Verafin, we recently analyzed our massive cloud data set with over $4 trillion in assets from thousands of financial institutions. And we found that elderly persons are prime targets for wire fraud. Now, to give you a sense of the scale of this analysis, our cloud environment contains over 140 million wire transactions from 40 million unique payee accounts. And we're continually growing this data set at a rate of about 4 million wire transactions and 950,000 accounts monthly. So we can comb through this data and actually pull out some really pertinent facts. That way, we can see where the fraud trends are, and we know where we can concentrate our efforts. And we know for a fact that elderly persons are being targeted specifically. As shown by our analysis, the rate of wire fraud for this segment is alarming. Elderly persons accounted for 65% of attempted occurrences and 66% of attempted wire fraud value in Q3 of 2021. We also found that the median value of attempted wire fraud has been increasing in our cloud from around $5.3 thousand in Q2 2020 to $9,000 in Q3 of 2021. That's an increase of nearly 70% in only 6 quarters. But we know that as the fraudsters refine their techniques, they get better at extracting larger amounts of funds. And they may do this in one incident, but they may spread this out over a series of incidents, not making someone the victim of a scam once, but several times by trying to protract this fraud out as long as they can. Growth of elder, especially in the 65 to 75 and 75 to 85 segments, is something we've seen. Now, the insights and many more things like this can actually be seen by downloading a copy of our Cloud Trends report. Now, we're going to talk a little more about that later, but that's also another valuable resource that you can use to identify trends and then look for those trends in your own institution. Typically, what we see is what the industry sees. And again, that's because of our nationwide footprint. Now, there are likely many driving forces behind the findings in our Cloud Trends report. But we know one thing is for certain: fraud is constantly evolving, and that includes scams targeting seniors. And this has no doubt been evident for you in recent years, and the last few years, perhaps more than ever. According to the Department of the Treasury's 2022 report on the National Money Laundering Risk Assessment, in 2022, they said this: the global COVID-19 pandemic has significantly accelerated the transition from in-person financial activities to online account opening, payments, and lending. This has increased the fraud risk for online financial services and commerce in general, and led to a dramatic spike in the number of stimulus, healthcare, bank, elder, and government fraud scams exploiting the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's a really important consideration. We have seen for a number of years the move towards digitization, but that has been accelerated greatly over the last couple of years. And now you have people who have never used technology before to conduct their financial affairs being forced to do it online. That's going to complicate things for sure. So this has been a case the last few years. It's a case in point for how rapidly fraud can evolve. We saw fraudsters shift from targeting seniors with a barrage of opportunistic COVID-19 related scams nearly overnight, from phishing scams to stimulus and charity schemes, many of which you see listed here. Now, for seniors with limited assets and income, the impact of financial fraud can be devastating, adding to the fact that many seniors often keep their assets at one financial institution. We know that today, many people will keep their assets at several institutions, but seniors tend to stick with one institution. So if a fraudster gets a hold of that account, they've got a really good chance at draining the entire life savings over time, if they're smart enough to do it. There's one thing we know about fraudsters: they're really good at extracting money from their victims and going undetected. That's why we're going to talk about some of what you can do to detect crimes today. The long-term customer relationships mean that banks and credit unions are always uniquely positioned to protect elderly customers and members from financial exploitation. Remember, your elderly customers, they come into your branches all the time. They really do sometimes feel like the people at the bank are like family. And there's so much you can do to protect those customers. This advisory here from the CFPB notes that financial exploitation, the illegal or improper use of an older person's funds, property, or assets, is the most common form of elder abuse. And yet, only a small fraction of incidents are ever reported. And that older persons are attractive targets because they often have assets and a regular source of income, and may be especially vulnerable, as we've said, due to isolation, bereavement, and/or disability. Now, the CFPB recommends a whole bunch of things for financial institutions to do. Some of the following that we'll talk about here today, but it's all about preventing, detecting, and responding to the financial exploitation of older people. First, you can develop, implement, and maintain internal protocols and procedures for protecting account holders from elder financial abuse. Lots of things you can do around there: training requirements and resources, reporting to the appropriate federal, state, and local entities. Very important. Reg E compliance relating to things like electronic funds transfers, procedures for sharing account information with third parties, and of course, always ongoing collaboration with the stakeholders. And that includes everyone within your institution, from the front line to the back office up to management. And that brings us to the next one: train management and staff to prevent, detect, and respond to elder financial exploitation. You need to train your employees regularly and frequently. And you can also tailor that training to specific staff roles. Some of the topics for training are a clear and nuanced definition of what elder financial exploitation is, the warning signs, including the red flags you should be on the look for, and then the actions or steps to prevent that exploitation and respond to suspicious events, including interacting properly with the account holders. And that's something we'll always want to reference over and over. This is a very difficult conversation to have, specifically if someone is being abused by a person of trust. So being able to handle that conversation delicately is paramount to protect your customer and perhaps even have them open up to you just a little bit more. And then, of course, you can detect elder financial abuse by harnessing technology. Now, no surprise, I am a technology guy here today, and I do that a lot in my work at Verafin. But it's very important that your fraud detection systems or your analysis, whether you use an automated system or in a manual environment, you need to be able to detect a lot of those red flags that point to possible financial exploitation. And we can talk more about that today. Now, the fourth thing you need to do, of course, is always report suspicious activity. There are two types of filings. Of course, you have your mandatory filing, and then, of course, you'll have your regulatory reports or your SARs. And you need to protect your older account holders. And then, of course, collaborating with stakeholders, as I've said. So a little bit about the 3 lines of defense in the fight against elder financial abuse. And as I've already said, the first line of defense is customer education. So customer awareness is all about arming your customers with the knowledge needed to protect themselves. Customer awareness includes things like education programs, common scams, online banking safety, engaging with family and caregivers, and of course, ensuring you have a very good account opening process, not only for the account opening, but also any changes in accounts if someone adds a new beneficiary or something like that. And also, don't be afraid to think outside the box. One of the things you could do is even do something like sponsor a day at a local senior center and talk about financial safety awareness. But customer education is integral to the fight against this type of activity. I personally speak to my parents about staying safe in their online sessions all the time, and education is the most important thing we can do. Now, the second line of defense is internal training and processes. I always forget that. I'm in Canada. I can't remember how I'm supposed to say that on a webinar for my American friends. Whether it's process or process, this is still the second line of defense. You need to know your customers. In fact, often the long-term relationships with these customers are so well established that the front line knows these customers very well. And sometimes they feel like family. Often coming to the bank is actually like seeing family, as your staff are trusted individuals. So if a new account is being opened, you need to understand the expected activity of the customer, but also whether it's a new account or an ongoing account, you need to understand the relationship for any individuals authorized to access the accounts. And if there's new people authorized, you need to understand who they are and what they're doing. With longer term relationships, both behaviors and authorized persons are well understood by your staff, and deviations from what would be considered normal, they can point to exploitation. In 2011, FinCEN released an advisory to FIs on filing suspicious activity reports regarding elder financial exploitation. In many cases, branch personnel familiarity with specific victim customers may lead to identification of anomalous activity that could alert bank personnel to initiate a review of the customer activity. Again, you play an important part. FinCEN then went on to say that financial institutions should evaluate indicators of potential financial exploitation in combination with other red flags and expected transactional activity being conducted by or on behalf of the elder. Some of the red flags to be on the lookout include the following: erratic or unusual banking transaction or changes in banking patterns, frequent large withdrawals, including daily maximums from ATMs, sudden non-sufficient fund activity, or uncharacteristic non-payment of services. Sometimes you're looking at debit transactions that are inconsistent with the customer, or a new and uncharacteristic attempt to wire a large sum of money somewhere. And then, of course, you need to look at the closing of things like CDs or accounts, without a regard to the penalties involved. Now, that's some of the transactional red flags. It's also important to look for interactions with customers or caregivers, including things like a caregiver shows sudden interest or excessive interest in the elder's finances, or an unusual degree of fear or submissiveness can be seen by your customer who's deferring to this caregiver. If you can't speak directly to the elder themselves, despite repeated attempts, that may indicate something's wrong. A new caregiver suddenly begins conducting financial institutions on behalf of the elder person without any documentation, or the customer moves away from existing and trusted relationships to new friends or strangers. Maybe the individual's financial management suddenly changes, like the power of attorney or adding a new family member as a beneficiary or a co-signer. And specifically, if the elderly person lacks knowledge about their financial status or shows a sudden reluctance to talk about anything in the financial landscape. So be on the lookout for a lot of these things. There's so many things to look out, but when we start seeing more of these red flags, they can point to a problem. And then, of course, once something seems to be amiss, it is critical to establish internal protocols for responding to the exploitation. You need to talk about who's going to approach the customer, when to notify investigators, and then, of course, your reporting procedures themselves. And staff training and detection and response. This is a delicate matter, and staff needs to know how to gently and appropriately handle that situation. I can never say that too much. From the front line to the back office to management, you need to establish that framework to handle both the financial and emotional ramifications of this issue. This brings us to the third line of defense, your fraud monitoring program. Whether you're working in a manual environment or you utilize an automated fraud monitoring system, you need to evaluate your fraud detection capabilities to ensure that you can monitor for changes in the customer relationship that could indicate elder financial exploitation. You can detect financial exploitation by harnessing technology. Some indicators of elder fraud may not match conventionally accepted patterns of suspicious activity, but nevertheless, they could be unusual in light of a particular account holder's regular pattern of behavior. That's why the CFPB encourages institutions using predictive analytics to review, their filtering criteria against individual holders' patterns, and to explore additional risk factors that may be associated with the exploitation. Proper protection means identifying things like your red flag transactional activity, out of pattern behavior, suspicious activity, looking for specific scam scenarios, or activity across multiple channels, as often the actual abuse is being perpetrated across multiple channels. And sometimes it may be activity spanning multiple institutions. And remember, the power of 314B collaboration can be something that can help you do this. So I want to take a look at how automated relationship monitoring can help protect and fight elder financial abuse. So here we have Anne. Anne is an 80-year-old retiree, and she's moved in with her daughter, Marie. And Marie has convinced Anne to let her take care of her personal finances. Now, Anne's finances consist mainly of about $50,000 in life savings, pension check deposits, and small purchases for things like groceries or gifts for her family members. Now, unknown to Anne, Marie has come on hard times. And remember, we've seen an excessive volume of this happening during COVID-19, as desperation has caused people to do things they may not have even done in the past. But Marie's been withdrawing $500 increments multiple times per month from her account. And she's been transferring money from her mother's account using online banking. And that's something Anne has never done. So over time, Marie has taken more than $20,000 from her mother. Anne finds her bank statement and she's confused about this balance. Now, Marie, as the trusted caregiver, assures her everything is fine and she's going to take care of it. And while Anne is concerned, she loves and trusts her daughter, and she thinks she has her best interests at heart. Enter Julie Karsten. She's a BSA officer at Sound State Bank, and she receives an elder abuse alert on Verafin, within her platform. Now, I do understand that this is what it looks like in Verafin today, but the real hope is that I can show you what we do, and you can take this back and incorporate something into your program. Now, when Julie logs in to work this alert, she can see the results of the automated analysis. It's organized in an easy to digest format. The red flags and evidence form an analytical scenario that examines various pieces of evidence to look for red flags for transactional or behavioral activity. So if someone starts to misuse the account, we can start that analysis. The first piece of evidence displayed takes into account the age of the customer and also their occupation. It's important to note that the various pieces of evidence, they need to work together. Some things boost, some things explain away. But you can use all these red flags in coordination. The more people trip red flags, the riskier this becomes. An automated solution allows you to do this, but there are certainly ways to detect this in a manual environment as well. Julie looks for significant balance drops in the account, and she can see evidence in this account for new channels of activity and excessive activity in channels when compared to historical behaviors. Automated technology allows you to see things clearly, automatically, and easily. And this allows Julie to ensure she can intervene on her customer's behalf as soon as possible. So Julie phones Anne, she describes those suspicious transactions, and then she goes on to delicately explain elder financial abuse. And because she has the proper processes in place, she can help Anne understand how things work, but ensure she's treating this matter as delicately as it needs to be. And then in accordance with her institution's policies, Julie goes ahead and files a SAR. And that's really important. In addition to her mandatory state filing, on the SAR, she's careful to choose the correct suspicious activity and careful to include things like the details and name of the victim. That's how technology can actually help you harness and stop this activity. Now, I'm almost finished here today, but I do want to talk about some resources available to you that you can hopefully make use of. Chronically underreported, a lack of accurate data typically obscures the true extent of elder financial abuse. But by analyzing 1 billion transactions each week in our cloud from over 3,000 financial institutions, we have over 15,000 examples of wire fraud, of which more than 6,000 involve elder financial abuse. We've uncovered a lot of insights into the scale of wire fraud, some of which I've shown you today. And you can find all that and more in our quarterly clouds insights, and that's always available in our online resource center. I'd also like you to encourage this to check out this ebook at verafin.com, completely free, and it's something you can actually share with your frontline staff. Plus, it includes a convenient one-page quick reference guide to share with your frontline. This guide is going to help those combating wire fraud within financial institutions to learn more about scam scenarios like BEC, romance, employment loan, lottery, grandparent scams, and more. The Department of Justice is striving to combat financial crimes against older Americans, and you can learn about prevalent financial scams so you can guard against them and get involved in making your community safer. And if you need that, there's an elder abuse resource roadmap that can guide you to the right agency for your particular situation. And financial institutions are also encouraged to participate in local networks, and you can identify networks by contacting the APS agency or the local Area Agency on Aging, or a senior information or assistance hotline. The Elder Care Locator, supported by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, enables users to search for their local APS agency or AAA, and it's accessible at eldercare.gov. And you can also provide a list of points of contact and sources of information to account holders and their caregivers. So some of your takeaways today: it's important to educate customers on fraud, scams, and exploitation. You need to develop and maintain internal procedures for screening and reporting possible exploitation. Train all your staff on detection and responding, and look at deploying technological solutions and machine learning to detect fraud. Finally, be sure to visit Verafin's online resource center. It's full of things like white papers, webinars, blogs, feature sheets, infographics, case studies, videos, and the aforementioned Cloud Insights report. And you can visit www.verafin.com to take advantage of this treasure trove of resources. That is all for me today. Corey Lynch, the product evangelist here at Verafin. Now go fight some crime. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Corey. That was really interesting, and those resources look great. I'm going to turn it over to Marty Fleischecker, Senior Financial Fraud Ombudsperson at the Minnesota Department of Commerce. Marty?
Thank you. I have to wait until Corey takes his down. There we go. Hopefully you can see my PowerPoint. It's up on the screen. So like Corey, I want to thank the Minnesota Bankers Association for inviting me today, and all of you who are attending, to hear about this important topic. I deal with this stuff every day. Again, my name's Marty Fleischecker. I'm with the Minnesota Department of Commerce, and every day what I deal with are reports of financial exploitation from banks, credit unions, financial advisors, and broker dealers. So I see this stuff, and I deal with the same victims that you're dealing with every day and in your banking setting. And it's been a pleasure for me to work with banks and other financial institutions over the last 3 to 4 years. Before that, I was assistant commissioner for 5 years, and I've been with Commerce for about almost 24 years now. So I know most of our industries pretty well here. I've seen bankers spending, countless hours with their older and vulnerable clients, engaged in activities to protect them. And I know this is uncompensated time. And so that's why the commissioner developed this program at Commerce, when business leaders and legislators and others reached out to us and said, hey, how can you help? And we started with securities firms, and then the law was expanded to banks and credit unions and other financial institutions. And it's been a great, it's just been great working with banks. The victims referred to me are typically 65 years of age or older, but otherwise are, of all colors, educational levels, socioeconomic statuses, geographic locations. Fraudsters target everyone. And related to what Corey said, and I just want to remind people of this, is that we do outreach activities here at the Department of Commerce. So if you have a group of customers that you want us to come out and talk to them, we're happy to do that. Last week I was in Springfield. There were 2 banks and a credit union that put together a gathering of their customers, and we had a great time and had some good discussions. This is an overview of what I'll be covering today. And I want to mention that what Commerce does seems to be a secret. So I just want to go over briefly what Commerce does generally, and then, where you can report fraud related to our major industries. I also want to talk about where you can report fraud and financial exploitation directly to us, to my program. And because businesses and individuals often don't know where to report fraud, they report things to us anyway at Commerce, and that's okay. We go ahead and we send it off to the correct agency and try to get the person help, no matter what the issue is. And finally, I have access to FinCEN. I use it a lot, and I want to just talk a little bit about that and the information and suspicious activity reports that I find is most helpful to me in the stuff that I do every day. So briefly, this is a picture of our current commissioner, Grace Arnold. She's been the commissioner for about 1.5 years. These are some of our major industries. We're the primary regulator of these industries, but that it also includes state charter banks and credit unions, again, that I work with all the time. And then we have about 22 industries in total that we have some regulatory authority for. We license hundreds of thousands of individual and the businesses, and yet we're one of the smallest state agencies in Minnesota. Most states regulate only 1 or 2 industries, such as insurance or securities or real estate. It's very helpful for our investigations when we get referrals of fraud, especially like, during the economic downturn around 2009, 2011, when we were doing mortgage fraud cases, investigating them, we had our real estate and mortgage and real estate appraisers, within a couple aisles here at Commerce. And it was really, great for doing those investigations and getting some people prosecuted, where I talked to other states and, they had to reach out to other state agencies and make special arrangements for meetings. And we didn't have that issue here. So we have 60 or so civil investigators who regularly investigate complaints, whether it's about the industry member or fraud in that industry. We also have 17 licensed police officers that investigate criminal fraud, financial fraud cases, and they have statewide jurisdiction. One of them is deputized by Homeland Security, and another one of our agents is deputized by the U.S. Postal Service, which is helpful to me if we're trying to recover some money that's been sent in the mail, or maybe some money that a money mule here in Minnesota has in their account, to try to find the original victim and try to get that money back. But they help in all sorts of ways. Excuse me. So where to report, just general things about the industries that I just talked about. And in this website, or my presentation, my PowerPoint presentation, I've given it to Renee, so you don't have to write anything down or make any notes on about this. Renee can just send a copy of this out to you. But that's a link to our reporting form for all of our industries at Commerce. People can call that phone number there from 8 to 4:30. At the 1600 number, we have people who staff our phones. And again, if they don't know, if they can't help you because it's not within our jurisdiction, they usually know where they can send someone. And then it's as easy as just sending an email to that email address, and we'll try to help. So this is the statute that I deal with every day, and I manage Commerce's Senior Safe program. And again, it's basically exclusively related to senior financial exploitation. The program was expanded in 2020 when banks and credit unions were included. And this is also the definition that's consistent with FinCEN's advisory on elder financial exploitation. In Chapter 45A, an eligible adult is somebody who is either 65 years old or older, or it's a vulnerable adult who's 18 years old or older and subject to any of the conditions or definitions listed in Minnesota law. And when a case is reported to Commerce concerning someone 65 or older, no problem. I know I have jurisdiction. When it's somebody between 18 and 64, then I don't know if I have jurisdiction. And again, this program is me. I have some help at Commerce, but we don't have a lot of resources here. So I I make a lot of mark reports to DHS, and and then it gets referred to a county adult protective services investigator, and they'll help me determine, whether the person is vulnerable. But I still work the cases until I find out that the person is not vulnerable. And even at that point, I still try to give the person help, even though, it takes away some of the tools in my toolbox to deal with these types of cases. I just want to give you a quick overview what Chapter 45A, and it's really the legislation I was talking about that created my position. So what did Chapter 45A do? It allows banks to report suspected instances of financial exploitation to the Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Center. Financial services providers, commerce, law enforcement, and prosecuting attorneys can put holds on transactions for up to 15 business days, to investigate. Of course, we never want to put a hold and lock down all of somebody's money and stop payments so they get kicked out of assisted living, or what their Netflix gets turned off or whatever. But we're looking at more targeted instances where, somebody is limited, taking out $1,000 or more. They're limited to $200 a day at the counter because somebody might be using the victim's ATM card. So that 15-day hold can be placed on there. If at any time you determine there's no financial exploitation, which occurs occasionally, then you take it off as soon as possible. That 15 days can be extended another 10 business days. We ask you to please report all instances of holds to the Department of Commerce, because if the customer appeals it, it goes to our commissioner to determine if that hold is justified or not. I have never had anyone, we're very careful. And even though I put 12 or so holds last month alone, I've never had in 3.5 years an appeal, a formal appeal to any of our holds. And I can tell you, customers aren't always happy when we put a hold on their account or when a bank reports things to us. But I can follow that up with saying, at the end of my conversation or at the end of the case, I've never had anybody unhappy or they're always thankful that their financial institution and the state cares about what the person is going through, or that they may be involved in some sort of financial exploitation. Reports to the mark are sent to it. So if somebody reports to the Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Center, they may assume that financial institution may assume that Commerce gets it. We don't get it. And the mark will report to Adult Protective Services, the county, if it's relevant, and local law enforcement. So if you want to report to Commerce, you have to do it specifically Commerce. As long as the reporting is done in good faith, the financial service provider, its employees, Commerce employees, police officers, we're all immune from liability for those activities of putting holds on funds. This is the reporting form for the program that I manage. On the form, it's very concise. People tell me it's like 5 minutes to fill a Commerce's report out. We ask for very minimal information. And if you want Commerce's help, just go to this form, go to our website, find this form, and you can report to Commerce. That's my cell phone on there. You can call me directly if you're not sure. And I get calls every day from financial institutions, literally every day. They want to talk about cases, and we try to figure out together the best way to handle these, because a lot of them are unique. And as Corey said, these scams are evolving all the time. This is the Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Center. Some people call it the common entry point. That's there. And like I say, I have to make referrals there too. You can call the phone number. They're very friendly. They'll take it over the phone, or you can fill out the report. Because they have so many different types of abuse they deal with, it's a much longer form than the one at Commerce, but it's still easy to fill out. Minnesota Attorney General's office. I often have friends that ask me if I work there. I don't work for the Minnesota Attorney General's office, because they don't know what Commerce does. But I do get referrals from the Attorney General's office on some of these fraud cases. Anything involving fraud, even Commerce's industries, the Minnesota Attorney General, if it relates to consumer in Minnesota, they have they have jurisdiction to handle the case. Broad array of different issues they can deal with. I get tenants. I got a couple tenant things complaints this month where the tenants thought it was fraud, the different things that were happening with their rent payments and other issues. And then, so I referred those over to the attorney generals. And then charity verification. That's something that we deal with where someone will wonder if, their parent is, or whether they've been approached by a legitimate charity. And the attorney generals, they register all the charities, and you can go there. It's very easy to use their website to determine if it's legit. We've had other things where people were buying $2,000 vacuums and having to finance it, and people took their old vacuum, just crazy stuff like that. Refer all those cases to the Minnesota Attorney General. And here is a link to their website, and it has detailed instructions about the information that their investigators need to pursue their cases. And you can also give them a call. They're very friendly people, and they'll do whatever they can to help you as well. Other things that we get referred to us until 2006, Commerce's Enforcement Division included jurisdiction for building contractors. Charlie Dernberger and his program were here at Commerce. Now they're over at Department of Labor in the industry. Governor Pawlenty shook things up a little bit and consolidated things, and they do a great job. And anytime any of these types of issues come up, that's where I refer it. We still get, like I say, a fair number of building contractor complaints referred to us, and these are some of the more common issues I see. Like Commerce, Dolly is really easy to send a complaint to. You can send a written complaint in, call their phone number, or like Commerce, just send them an email. So when it comes to suspicious activity reports, I talk to BSA officers, and I love BSA officers. They are the best people for me to talk to at any bank. They get exactly what I do. I don't have to do a lot of explaining. We cut right to the chase, and we're able to, talk about what's going on. And BSA people, again, if it wasn't inappropriate, I'd run out there and hug some of them for some of the information that I find in BSA reports, because it is so helpful to what I do. And I'm not going to go through all these because I'm limited in time, but as I said, FinCEN put out an advisory about elder financial exploitation. It updated the 2011 version, and that was put out this year on June 15. And I sent a link to Renee so she could include it in the chat if she wants to for you, or if she wouldn't mind. And that was issued on World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. So it was June 15, 2022. And there's a whole bunch of great information in there about, I think there were 24 red flags about suspicious client behavior. I know Corey covered, many of them, and account activity that's indicative of financial exploitation. This type of information is just extremely helpful for what I do in my position, and money mule activity. A lot of the victims, especially in romance scams, when they bled of their money, then the scammers will start using them as a network to move money, as you've probably seen in your institution. And that's something we also help fight. We're looking for those. Every year the DOJ does a sweep, and we provide information to the DOJ to help them with their sweep and to try to do something with that network. This information is really crucial to what we do here at Commerce. And whatever you can do to help fill in some of these things. I know I contacted some banks, some the contact information isn't too good. Or if you see a law enforcement agency, or there are requirements for filling SARs, and then you can also file voluntary SARs. Anytime you have a senior and an older Minnesotan who you're going to terminate their account because you believe they're a victim, or they're engaged in money mule activity, or whatever the case is, that really helps us at Commerce when I get the new financial institution that contacts me and says, "Hey, Marty, we think there's something strange going on here." Well, I can go back in these FinCEN reports, and I've done it many times where I can see, two financial institutions have filed information. And then when I'm investigating the case and I'm talking to that person, they don't know that I know all the information or generally all the information that caused them to lose their last two bank accounts or three bank accounts. And obviously I can't tell them about it, but I can use that information when I'm talking to them to convince them I know what I'm talking about and to hopefully get them to stop, engaging in whatever activity that they're engaged in. So I'm run over time. I apologize. Here is my contact information. Send me an email, call me on my cell phone, and that's it for me. Thank you very much. And I'll stop sharing here.
Thanks, Marty. We do have a question for you.
Sure.
I think you're really going to like it. It says, thank you, Marty, for helping us. And more importantly, at-risk vulnerable adults in our communities. Our customers have benefited from your character and commitment. What can we do to help you get more resources?
Well, that's you're right. I love that question. So next year they are going to have a proposal before the legislature. I wrote it and I sent it in, and my caseload has doubled in the last year. And we're going to be asking for at least, I think, one or two people. I'm not sure. The commissioner has to approve it, but when that comes around, it's always been great working with you, Tess, and others at the Minnesota Bankers Association. So I know that if it's reasonable and we can agree on the terms, I always know that you'll give us support, and that's why I love working with you.
Thanks, Marty. Someone's just asking for your email again. Do you want to just share that quickly?
Sure. It's you can Google my name and you'll find it, but it's martin.fleischhacker@state.mn.us. Okay,
so we have a question that just came in. Is it okay for a bank to freeze an entire account for an elderly customer when the customer appointed an attorney in fact under a power of attorney, but that person appears to be using the elderly customer's money for the attorney in fact's personal use? Okay, so it's freezing an entire account. If you can answer that.
Yeah, I mean, again, what we want to do is not freeze a person's entire account. That's what the legislature, when I testified when this law was passing, there were a lot of groups that were concerned that the seniors wouldn't have, or the account holder wouldn't have access. But it does specifically talk about powers of attorney. And I don't know what it is, but the last 2 to 3 months, I'm seeing a lot more cases. Most of the cases were going to adult protective services, but all of a sudden in the last 3 months, I'm getting a lot of power of attorney abuse cases. And yes, I do put holds on the funds so that the person who's committing the abuse can't get access to that money. I just did it last week on a case, and I did, I think, 1 or 2 the week before.
Yeah, and normally if you don't honor a power of attorney, a bank could expose itself to some liability, but the statute was written to protect banks in this situation if they suspect reasonable suspicion of fraud, probably.
Yep.
The language.
Exactly.
One more question. Can the bank place a hold on dispersing funds for a vulnerable customer who deposited a $16,000 U.S. Treasury check, but who has been the victim of fraud in the past? So it sounds like not an active fraud situation. They just now have money and they're a vulnerable adult.
Well, the people I deal with, many of them are multiple victims. And, that's one reason why some of the banks and credit unions have referred stuff to Commerce, is so that we can help educate the customer what's coming down the road, because they're going to be approached. If they've lost money, they're going to be approached with other scams. They're going to be approached with recovery scams, all sorts of things. And I want that customer, I'm talking to people who I've been dealing with I get calls and texts from people that I've been dealing with for over 2 years on their cases when new things come up. And there are certain people who are just vulnerable. No matter how much money they've lost, they're vulnerable to new scams. And I'm working with a U of M professor, and there's all different reasons for this, but it's one of those things where, having access to a trusted person, because virtually everybody I deal with has one thing in common: they're isolated. And it's not necessarily because they don't have friends or family members. It's because that's what the scammers do. They isolate you, they create a new reality for you, and then they get you to act based on emotion and that new reality. And if they can get your emotions to take over your rational side, and I try to discuss the rational piece with people.
Okay, thank you. Corey, we have a question for you.
I'm back. Perfect.
Hi. The question is, do the Verafin resources mentioned provide guidance for what to consider programming within your automated fraud detection system, thresholds, activity, triggers, etc.?
Yeah, so the resources, I mean, essentially, every system is different, right? So it's very hard for us to tell you exactly how to program your system. There are probably dozens and dozens, but the red flags themselves, certainly the ones that are highlighted most often, are the precursors that would make the most sense in an automated system. So typically we have 4 or 5 that are outlined in those resources that will kind of start you off on the path of being able to institute a rule set. Now, of course, it can be difficult, but if you look for a couple such as certainly age or occupation, as Marty said, age is not always a definer of who the victim may be, because it could be anyone, as you say, who's in a position of trust with another individual. So we would say, you could start with name and perhaps age. We also do think it's important to watch channels and to look for the deviations from channels. What we find is that typically your elderly population, they pay the same bills every 2 weeks, like all of us, creatures of habit. So you have the same volumes of activity typically going out, and typically the same money coming in. So it's important to look for deviations from those. So I would always say, if you have like a 20% deviation in ACH, for instance, or if we start seeing an increase in POS transactions, those are the things you want to pull out first. A lot of the other red flags, once you've identified this kind of more simple rule set, you can then go in and look for some of those other red flags. It's problematic sometimes to program in dozens. I mean, as Marty said, there are dozens of red flags that you could be aware of. I would say another important one actually would also be a new relationship being added. Anytime that happens in an account, it's also important to scrutinize that, especially for anyone who is vulnerable. So those are outlined in those resources. In terms of programming those in, that's always going to be different from whatever system you're using. But taking 4 or 5 of those main indicators will certainly set you on a path to being able to do it automatically, for sure.
Thank you, Corey. We have one last question. It's for Marty. I have an elderly customer that I believe is vulnerable, but not actively being victimized, memory issues and the like. Their adult children are not nearby or involved in their finances. What preventative resources are available that are appropriate for an elderly customer in this situation?
Well, in that instance, it's monitoring the account. And if you think they can't handle their finances, well, then sending it over to Adult Protective Services to do an assessment and find out if the person is vulnerable and, what should be done. I've had lots of cases where you can't even tell. The vast majority of the victims I deal with, you cannot tell that they have any, over 90%. They don't have any cognitive decline that you can detect, but yet I've worked with Hennepin County on cases where we've gotten people who were, they got a conservator put in place to handle their finances because they could not stop sending large chunks of money, even though when you talk to them, they sound fine. And the courts agreed, yeah, they need help or they're going to be broke and on, government assistance when they don't need to be.
Thank you. Looks like we're out of time, but thanks again to Verafin and Corey Lynch for providing that great important information. That data set is amazing. A lot of data. And thanks to Marty for sharing his expertise with us.
Data will help us. Data will help us all beat this crime.
Yeah. Thanks, Marty. You're a great resource for our banks and you've saved seniors a lot of money already. Preventing financial abuse obviously is a priority for banks, and we hope we provided you some new information and tools. The webinar will be posted on MBA's YouTube channel. So if you want to watch it again or share it with a colleague, you can do that. I think that you can get the slide deck from Corey if you email him, right, Corey?
Absolutely.
And that email again is, Yeah,
is corey.lynch@verafin, verafin.com.
great. And then we do have Marty's slide deck if you are interested in having that. And then just remember the MBA has a legal department. That's a great first stop for these questions about financial abuse. You can reach us at 952-835-3900 or legal@minbankers.com.
And Tess,
So that is it. Yeah.
one last thing I just want to mention. I have a lot of banks who ask me that for a letter that they can send to their client, which they're required to put send their client a notice. And I meant to say this before and I forgot, and you just reminded me that you drafted, or somebody at the Minnesota Bankers Associated drafted a great letter for people to use if they put a hold on transactions, any holds or delays on an account.
Yeah, that was Tom Boswell-Healy, our associate counsel and compliance consultant. He drafted that, and that is in our deposit manual. If you don't have access to that, we can also just share that with you if you email us. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you for joining us this morning. Have a great day.